guys hear me okay? Awesome. Good morning. My name is Andy. I'm one of the pastors here on staff. And this morning, we're going to do something a little bit different for the next couple of Sundays. As you guys know, we have Easter just right around the corner. And it's a time where all of us get ready to invite perhaps friends and family. We just really want to encourage and hope that you would all think about that as you fill out your 3 by 3 I've lost track of threes. But with all that said, we also want to do something a little bit different this Easter. Rather than just an invitation, we want to ask you guys to perhaps even share just some of your journeys with God, with your friends and your families. What we've noticed is, what if evangelism was less so much about inviting people to some Christian Sunday experience? Or perhaps for some of us, where we have to have this perfect argument to be able to defend our faith. What if it was actually an invitation into your story and your journey with God? Wouldn't that hopefully take away some of the fears that we might have? And so with that, that's what we wanted to focus on for this Easter celebration, is just being able to share our journeys with how God is working in our lives. And to model that out for the next couple of weeks, I'm really excited to have both our elders in training who will be coming up, David and Eric, to share their journeys and their story with how God has met them, is working in their life. So I'm really excited for that. So with that, I'm actually going to introduce David. He's going to come up. Let's give him a warm welcome.
All right. Good morning, everyone. Really good to see you all this morning. And as many of you know, when I'm up here, it's to share announcements. So I'm really excited to do something different this time, but actually to share just my personal testimony, and especially about some of the circumstances that happened about 12 and a half years ago, and how God really used those circumstances to give me a new heart and set me on a new path in life. So this takes us back to 2010. I know that feels like a long time ago, but life was actually going quite well for me back then. So I was married to my beautiful wife, Tiffany, and I think many of you agree that I got the better end of the bargain on that relationship. We also had two beautiful young daughters, Ellen and Clara, who were 4 and 2 years old at the time. I had also graduated from Harvard Business School just a few years before that, and gotten a job at the what is then the biggest hedge fund in the world, and was doing quite well there. And in the spring of that year, 2010, we also bought our very first house in a neighborhood that Tiffany and I dreamed of living for a long time, and had just settled in. So, by all accounts, everything was going really well. And I came to increasingly have this view that, at this point, I've got my life and my family's life under my control. Even though I was a Christian, I really felt like all of my hard work, my accomplishments, and frankly, the money I was earning was going to buy us this security in this life. And again, even though I was Christian and I believed that Jesus died for my sins, at least for the life here on earth, I felt that all of my work is sufficient to give me a happy, secure life. But all of that changed in the summer of 2010 when our younger daughter Clara started to be very ill. And media team, maybe you can put up a photo of her. Yeah, I know, she's very cute. So this is a photo taken maybe just a couple of months before she became really sick. But, she had been growing up healthy, kind of all 2.5 years of her life until that point. But she started having seizures. And initially, the seizures were very subtle and infrequent. But more and more, she would have multiple clusters of seizures every single day. And then, the other thing that was, really disturbing to us is while she had made a lot of gain with her brain development, as a baby and then a toddler, and she was now able to speak in full sentences, she actually kind of lost that power of speech, and she was not able to speak comprehensibly anymore. She actually started kind of going back to babbling, like she did when she was a baby. And then, I think the other really disturbing change was that her personality just really transformed. So Clara had always been like a very happy and easygoing baby, as you can see from the photo. But she, as the seizures took hold, she became just agitated and restless all the time. To a point where she wouldn't be able to sit still in one place even for a few seconds. And she was just crying and constantly needing to be comforted. So, all of this was, very disturbing for Tiffany and me. So we took her to the hospital, and Clara was hospitalized for about a week so that the doctors and nurses can run all different kinds of tests on her. And, at the end of this week, the diagnosis that we received is that Clara has a very rare form of childhood epilepsy called West syndrome. We also learned that the West syndrome is considered to be one of the catastrophic forms of epilepsy in childhood. And it's catastrophic for a couple of reasons. One is that it's really hard to gain seizure control with this form of epilepsy. With other epilepsy, you try medications or you try brain surgeries. But this is one that was known to be resistant to all of those treatments. And there are a couple of medications that are known to work, but oftentimes they will work only for maybe 3 months, 6 months, and then the seizures would come back, and those drugs will fail to keep the seizures at bay. So, many of the children who have this condition, they grow up into childhood with just more violent, more frequent seizures all the time. So many children with this condition, they actually have to wear a helmet and mouth guard all the time, because at any point in time, they could just fall down and have seizures. The second reason this epilepsy condition is considered catastrophic is unless there is a miraculous healing that stops the seizures up front, the years of accumulated seizures, they really have a damaging effect on your brain. Think of seizures as like an electrical storm within your brain. So as those accumulate each and every day, you can imagine what kind of damage it causes to a young child's brain. So that 9 out of 10 children with this condition, they're not able to live a full independent lives as adults. So this was obviously a very devastating diagnosis for us. And I remember a few episodes that happened at the hospital that made things even more darker for us. And some of these I think I shared with our servants back last fall. But the first thing that I remember is on the day that Clara's diagnosis was confirmed, my wife Tiffany just lay next to Clara on her hospital bed and just wept throughout the entire night into dawn. And the next day actually was Tiffany's 35th birthday. So, we had thought that it would be a joyous celebration of her 35th year. But instead, she spent the whole night just weeping next to Clara. The second thing I remember is on one of the evenings, I was trying to read a book with Clara. As mentioned, she was getting just agitated all the time. So it was getting harder to read books with her. But it was a ritual that Clara and I started from pretty much when she was born. So, I wasn't about to give up on it. So, we're trying to read at the hospital bed together. And then the doctor calls me out. And he says, David, you don't need to be reading books with Clara anymore. So I said, oh, why? And he said, Clara is never going to go to school. So, I think just based on how things were going, I realized that might be the outcome. But to hear a doctor say that so bluntly, that was quite sad for me. And then, just the third episode I remember from the hospital is when I had to hold Clara down for spinal tap. That was just one of the tests that they had to go through to confirm the diagnosis. And I'm not sure if any of you has gotten a spinal tap procedure done before, But even in the best of circumstances, trying to insert a large, long needle into the spinal cord is not good. So, Clara was just squirming in pain, not knowing what was going on. But I had to just hold her down during that time, and that's something that I wish no father would ever have to experience. So clearly, a lot of difficult things were happening during this period, and I think for me, what is just as devastating is I loved Clara so much, and I was ready to give up my life if it meant that Clara can have a full, normal life. But there was not a thing that I could do for her. No amount of effort, none of my accomplishments, no wealth in the world could relieve Clara even from just 1 minute of her suffering. And for a father, that was a really devastating feeling. So I had no choice but just turn to the one who might be able to do something about it, which was God. And as I described earlier, even though at that point I almost came to the view that look, maybe to get to heaven I need Jesus's sacrifice, but at least here in this life, I think I've got it, right? With all of my work, I think I've got it. I don't think I need God in this life anymore. But despite having had that view, God was so gracious to come walk with me during that time, and I still remember those were the times when I felt God's presence the deepest. And this was also the time when God revealed to me just a couple of really important things about his character and about the gospel. The first revelation was about just the strength of God's promise that if we cry out to God with faith, that he will listen. So around this time, my mother sent me 3 Bible verses to try to encourage me. And one of them just really hit home for me. And it just meant so much to me and really changed how I thought about Clara's illness. So if you don't mind, I'll actually just read that passage. It comes from the book of Mark, chapter 9, verse 14 through 27. And when I read it, I think you'll be able to understand why that passage gave me so much hope. So media team, maybe you can put it up. Oh, great. You guys are so good. All right, so I'll read this. When they came to the other disciples, they saw a large crowd around them and the teachers of the law arguing with them. As soon as all the people saw Jesus, they were overwhelmed with wonder and ran to greet him. "What are you arguing with them about?" Jesus asked. A man in the crowd answered, "Teacher, I brought you my son who is possessed by a spirit that has robbed him of his speech. Whenever it seizes him, it throws him to the ground. He foams at the mouth, gnashes his teeth, and becomes rigid." So basically describing a seizure. "I asked your disciples to drive out the spirit, but they could not." "You unbelieving generation," Jesus replied, "how long shall I stay with you? How long shall I put up with you? Bring the boy to me." So they brought him. When the spirit saw Jesus, it immediately threw the boy into a convulsion. He fell to the ground, rolled around, foaming at the mouth. Jesus asked the boy's father, "How long has it been like this?" "From childhood," he answered. "It has often thrown him into fire or water to kill him. But if you can do anything, take pity on us and help us." "If you can," said Jesus, "everything is possible for one who believes." And I'll just read that one more time because it meant so much to me. Everything is possible to one who believes. Immediately, the boy's father exclaimed, "I do believe. Help me overcome my unbelief." When Jesus saw that a crowd was running to the scene, he rebuked the impure spirit. "You deaf and mute spirit," he said, "I command you, come out of him and never enter him again." The spirit shrieked, convulsed him violently, and came out. The boy looked so much like a corpse that many said, "He's dead." But Jesus took him by his hand and lifted him to his feet, and he stood up. And when I read that, I was just so amazed that exactly 2,000 years ago, that there was another father who was going through the same exact experience that I was going through. And I was also just amazed by just the strength of Jesus' promise. Everything is possible to the one who believes. So, it just gave me a really different perspective about Clara's, illness that, the doctors were saying is kind of hopeless. And from that day on, we started praying. So every night when Clara goes to bed, Tiffany and I would gather by her bedside and we would just pray for a healing. The second revelation that I received during this time happened when I was walking Clara up a hill. So as mentioned, Clara was just agitated all the time, and the only thing that would comfort her, get her to stop crying, is putting her in this baby carrier and walking. But the only issue is she was already 2.5 years old at the time, so she was quite heavy, and it was a hot July summer afternoon, and I was trying to walk uphill, so it wasn't like a great experience. And as I was walking up that hill, all these really sad thoughts came to me. So not only about Clara's suffering, but the fact that she would never be able to experience the joy of going to school and learning. She would never be able to experience the joy of making friends. She may never have a chance to fall in love, right? She may never have a chance to have her own children. So, as all these sad thoughts were circling around my head, it even went to like a very dark place, which is, and I'm ashamed to say that at one moment I wondered, as the cars were driving up and down that hill, wouldn't it be better if one of the cars does come and hits us and kills us, because that means that Clara wouldn't have to live this life of suffering. But later, I heard God's voice, and He said, "Just as your heart is breaking for Clara, my heart breaks for Clara, and just as you love Clara so much, I love Clara even more, and that is the reason why I sent my own son to come, suffer, and die." And the image that I had at the time was God watching Jesus walk up the hill of Calvary with the cross on his back on his way to death. And just as I was helpless watching Clara suffer, God was being helpless watching his own son walk to his death, to suffer and to die. And I came to the realization that the reason God let that happen, despite his power, right, to stop all of that, is because his power, his love for Clara, for every child going through a serious illness, for every broken person, was so overwhelming that he allowed himself just to watch his son walk up that hill, suffer, and die. And when I came to that realization, it just gave me a very different perspective on life. Before, I think 99% of what I did was really to benefit myself and my family. But just getting an insight into God's heart, that was quite a revelation for me. So, again, difficult times during those weeks, but, again, I felt God's presence the deepest. And this is also when the miracle of Clara's healing began as well. So, I think those of you here who are a bit cynical by nature might say, well, Clara always had a 1 in 10 chance of being able to recover from this and enter into a normal life. So maybe it was luck. Maybe it wasn't a miracle. But I believe that it was a miracle just because of all the unusual things that happened around the time of her healing. And I'll just cite a few of those, and you can decide for yourself whether it was a luck or if it was a miracle. The first kind of unusual circumstance through which Clara healed was just this unexpected visit from a friend. Now, after we received the diagnosis, Clara's doctor said, most medications don't work for this condition, but there's this one thing we can try, which is a very high dosage steroid therapy. And the idea is that you pump so much steroid into the system that you're trying to shock your brain to stop having seizures. And just the one downside though is that because the steroid level is so high, you can only do this for 14 days. So either within 14 days, the seizures stop, and you have seizure freedom for 6 months or maybe even longer, or you don't gain seizure control, and then you have to stop the drug and you're out of options. So on the first day of the medication, we started with a lot of hope. like maybe this will do it, right? So we gave the medication to Clara, but later that day, she had her cluster of seizures. And then it went on. Second day, we gave her medicine, but she continued to have seizures into the third day, into the fourth day. On the fifth day, I received an email out of the blue from my one friend from college who is Christian that I was still staying in touch with. His name is David Yao. And actually, my friend from college, Shareth, is here to give me support today. Shareth knows him as well. But he was such a faithful guy. He was one of those guys, like, if you get to know him, you think, oh, God must be real for someone like this to exist. But just an incredibly faithful man. He was living abroad at the time, but he emailed me to say, oh, I have this last-minute trip to New York City, and I have a layover in San Francisco. Can I visit you? So I thought, this is like an interesting timing. So I told him what is going on with Clara, and he promised to come and pray for her when he comes. While we were waiting for David, we continued with the medication. Day 6, still seizures. 7, 8, 9, 10, she was still having seizures. On day 10, David came straight to our house from the airport, laid his hands on Clara, prayed for her, and there was no more seizures after that. So it was, just incredible timing, and I think it was really God's provision at the time. The second really unusual thing that happened towards the path of Clara's full healing is what happened after that medically and the next therapy that we came upon. So even though after David's prayers, Clara's seizures stopped, her brain waves were still abnormal, which could often mean that the seizures are going to come back sometime later. Tiffany and I were really struggling kind of what to do in this situation. But just then, another friend of ours approached us, and I think you know him too, Ed Chung. But he approached us and he said, I happen to not know another family whose child had the same exact rare condition. And they tried every medication in the world, but they all failed to stop the seizures. So out of desperation, they tried this very unusual therapy for epileptic kids, which is a dietary therapy. It's called ketogenic diet. And I know many of you know of ketogenic diet as like a weight loss diet, but in the medical context, it's even more restrictive and more extreme. So you're getting 90% of your calories from fat, 8% from protein, and 2% from carbohydrate. And the idea is to flip the brain's metabolism. So instead of burning sugar for energy, you're forcing your brain to burn fat for energy. And I see praise nodding. So I think people with medical experience probably know what I'm talking about. But anyway, like a very, very difficult diet to undergo. And you have to do this for 2 to 3 years. But that was the miracle cure for this son who had failed every drug in the world. We were interested, so we went to our doctors and asked if we can try it, and they said, administering this diet is just so hard for the child and for the parents, and we're not sure about the benefits, so we discourage you. But then, we found this one random doctor in Oakland who said, I have a daughter, same age as Clara, and I understand exactly why you guys have to try this. So she agreed to administer the diet. So she was put on it. The day after she started the diet, I went to check in on her. And remember, again, she was always agitated and restless during this time. She would never sit in one place for more than a few seconds. But I saw her playing quietly by herself in the playroom. So I was so amazed, and I approached her, and I looked in her eyes. And it was as if a light switch had gone on in her eyes. And from that moment, I actually knew that she was going to be okay. That, even if we have 2-3 years of this long road with this ketogenic diet, that she was going to be okay. And then, just the final unusual circumstance around her healing is my belief that God actually prepared both Clara and Tiffany for this diet. So as mentioned, in this diet, you're basically eating grease for breakfast, lunch, and dinner. So it's really hard. So many kids actually, it might work for them, but they have to stop because they just can't tolerate the diet anymore. But with Clara, even before she was sick, she loved greasy food. So when we would give her grilled cheese sandwich, she would just eat the cheese and leave the bread alone. And I remember before Clara was sick, Tiffany and I always wondered, why does Clara like greasy food so much? And maybe this is not going to be healthy for her. But as Clara actually happily stayed on this diet for the next 3 years, we knew that God actually prepared even her appetite for this healing. And then the other aspect of how God prepared our family is actually with Tiffany. So those of you who know Tiffany, when you look at her, she does not look like an engineer, right? But she actually studied mechanical engineering in college, but worked as an engineer only for 2 or 3 years. And we always wondered, why did God have you study engineering in college? But this ketogenic diet, because again, it's so extreme and the restrictions are so high. Putting together a recipe that's edible is an engineering challenge. It is a complex engineering challenge. And Tiffany was able to utilize, all the basic principles that she learned in engineering to come up with really creative recipes that Clara actually enjoys. So media team, maybe you can show the next slide. So it got to a point where towards the end of the ketogenic diet, Tiffany actually published a website to help other moms who are treating their epileptic kids with the ketogenic diet come up with some new recipes that are, as you can see, much more palatable and much prettier. And then I just wanted to mention one other thing about Clara's healing, which is also that God provided an incredible older sister in Ellen as Clara was going through all this. Maybe next slide. As Clara got older and she started school, she actually started to feel more self-conscious that, this food I'm eating is just weird. This is not like anything my friends are eating. But Ellen would always sit next to Clara, pretend she's tasting the food, and say, Clara, this is so delicious. You should try it. And when Clara was working hard to try to catch up on her development, right, that had regressed during her epilepsy, Ellen would constantly engage Clara in conversation and play to try to help her catch up on her cognitive development. So all of that leads to the next slide, which is from last weekend, actually. So the miracle, I believe it's a miracle. Again, you might consider it's a luck, but based on all the circumstances, I have to believe it's a miracle. Clara is just an incredibly healthy and incredibly beautiful girl today. And she's actually one of the most intellectually curious people I know. And she has an extremely keen mind. And again, I think this has to be God's miracle, not luck. So just to conclude everything, as I had a couple of years, or actually many years, to think about what happened during this time, one thing that kind of saddened me is the father and the son from the story of Mark 9. How come we don't hear about them again? Because, for people that I could really empathize with, I really wish I knew that they had happy lives after, right, that healing. Maybe they followed Jesus afterwards, and maybe they became early Christians who helped spread the gospel. But unfortunately, we don't know, right, because the Bible doesn't say. So, as I was pondering about that, what I came to realize is maybe the ending is not there. Maybe the ending to their stories is not there because God wants us to write the ending, right? So for me, what I would love for the child, what I would love for the Clara, is after having gone through such a difficult experience early in life, that she continues to grow up filled with God's strength, His wisdom, that His Spirit would be upon her, and God's love and goodness would follow Clara every day of her life. And then for me, at some point, I rejected that I even needed God, right, for at least this life here on earth. But God still showed me so much grace and so much power. And He revealed to me His heart for other sick children, for broken people around the world. So I wish I can live in a way that really honors, God's heart for all those people. But I think this is actually an invitation, not just for me, but actually for all of you. I think for many of you, there must be some story or character in the Bible that you could identify with. And, for many of them, the Bible doesn't tell us what happened to them, right? Like the Samaritan woman at the well, we don't know what happened to her, afterwards. Many of the disciples, we don't know what happened to the rest of their lives, right? But I think this is God's invitation that if there is a character or story that you can identify within the Bible, you get to write the ending of the story with your own lives. And for many of you, maybe you feel like you're not quite living in accordance with how you want those stories to end. But I think the amazing thing about the gospel is God's grace is new every morning. And every morning you have an opportunity to live your life in a new way that honors how you want those stories to end. So thank you for listening to me, and I'll pass it back to Pastor Andy for the sermon.
Whew. I guess being a father now, any story about children, man, it really gets to me. Really, really does. So, we gotta preach a sermon right now too. Whew. Wow, isn't that powerful? Can I just get an amen? Isn't that powerful? Yeah. We worship a God who is alive. He's not just somebody that we study or we hear about, but we know and we worship a God who deeply, deeply loves and cares for all of us. And that's our hope for the next few weeks as we prepare for Easter celebration, is that more than just an invitation to some Christian experience, that you would, maybe somebody highlighted on that card you wrote today, that you would have just the courage to say, hey, can I share with you my journey? Or maybe the next time you ask, how are you doing? And you're asked that same question, you be willing to be vulnerable and say, actually, I'm going through this right now, but can I tell you how my God is working in my life? What if evangelism was more about that? Because as David shared, I believe that many of us, not just in this room, but in this world right now, are searching for something deeper. That after the pandemic, and as we see the uncertainty of what was once called the invincible tech bubble, that there is something in all of us that we're looking for a deeper meaning, a deeper purpose to life, something that shows us that there is more to life than, as David shared, the things that we are taught to live by. I firmly believe that. In fact, as I shared a couple weeks ago, a Barna study showed that 43% of people are open to spiritual conversations in this day and age, which is a huge, huge shift. So I encourage you, don't be afraid, because you never know how somebody is waiting and hungry, just saying, finally, someone told me that there is more to life than this. Finally, someone told me that there is more life than this. And so that's going to be just the direction of this message. That's what I want to focus on just this morning. We're actually starting a brand new series through the Gospel of John as we ask ourselves, what is life? What is the meaning to life? And I think it's what's amazing is how society and culture tries to answer that question. For example, Gen Xers, if you're in the room, it was about get it done, work hard, right? I don't know how accurate these are. I just looked it up on Google, but it seems about right to me, right? Millennials, we were the lazy and me generation, right? If you guys remember that famous Time magazine article that says the me generation, all we care about is ourselves, right? We're all about play first and then work hard. I still remember, do you guys remember when YOLO came out? Oh, I feel like I'm dating myself right now, right? YOLO was a millennial. Some of you guys are way too proud right now, but you only live once, right? And then I hear that this next generation, there's this movement called Be Real. You guys ever heard of that? Okay, I can tell who the Gen Zers in the room, because some of you are like, oh yeah, that's me. I've a Be Real moment right now, right? For those of you who don't know, it's an app where you take a picture of this way, and then you also take a picture of yourself because you want to be real. We need some better answers to life, y'all, is what I'm trying to get at. And so to answer that, we're going to be going through the Gospel of John together. I'm excited because, as you know, in 2023, when we began this year, we started with this vision of home. right? We asked ourselves, what would it look like if we called our church, this community of Fillmore, and the Bay Area our home? Would it not change the way that we love and we serve and we care for people around us? And so as we were asking that question and looking for answers, let me tell you why we landed on the Gospel of John. It's because as I was searching throughout the whole scriptures, I was blown away and amazed how much of what we want to focus on was covered through this gospel. That I learned that in order for us to even understand what it means to build home here is to begin with understanding the very person of Jesus Christ himself. And so that's what we're going to go through. And I want to give a little bit of context before I get in our passage this morning. The Gospel of John is of 4 gospel accounts in the New Testament, each gospel account being a narrative of Jesus coming to this earth to save sinners from death itself. And as we see, that's why we call the gospel, it's defined as good news. Well, of the 4 accounts, it says that John is the most personal and intimate. John even calls himself the disciple whom Jesus loves. I mean, that's pretty bold, right? For you to call yourself as, I'm the one that Jesus loved. Like, I'm not that bold, but I do go around telling people I'm Jesus's favorite. Like, I'm God's favorite, right? But if they say that if John had a spirit animal, it would be that of an eagle, because like an eagle flies close to the sun, John was perhaps the closest to Jesus and beholding the majesty of Christ. And so in the Gospel of John, I believe we see that answer to the question that I feel like many of us are asking ourselves. That many of us will come across at some point in our life the meaning to life. What is the purpose of it? And it is in the Gospel of John where we see the answer to the fullness of life itself. So let's turn to our passage, and we're going to go through this as quickly as I can. In John chapter 1, verses 1 through 14. In the beginning was the Word, and the Word was with God, and the Word was God. He was in the beginning with God. All things were made through him. Without him was not anything made that was made. In him was life, and the life was the light of men. The light shines in the darkness, and the darkness has not overcome it. There was a man sent from God whose name was John. He came as a witness to bear witness about the light and all that might believe through him. He was not the light, but came to bear witness about the light. Don't worry, if this sounds like a Dr. Seuss, you're confused, we will unpack it in the next 10 minutes, okay? The true light, which gives light to everyone, was coming into the world. He was in the world, and the world was made through him, yet the world did not know him. He came to his own, and his own people did not receive him. But to all who did receive him, who believed in his name, he gave the right to become children of God, who were born not of blood, nor of the will of the flesh, nor the will of man, but of God. And the Word became flesh and dwelt among us, and we have seen his glory, glory as the only Son from the Father, full of grace and truth. Now, scholars will call this the prologue of John's gospel, that he most likely wrote this much later. But notice how he begins in verse 1, if we can go back to that. It says that in the beginning was the Word, and the Word was with God, and the Word was God. Now, what's interesting is it's not until 17 verses later where we see that that word is referring to Jesus himself. Now, imagine if you were writing a prologue or an introduction to someone's life. It would be strange to refer to them as the Word, would it not? What would make more logical sense would be to simply write, in the beginning was Jesus, and Jesus was with God, and Jesus was God. But why does John start with the Word? For us, it may seem a little out of context, but during that time, that word is actually the original Greek word is logos or logos, depending on how you want to pronounce it. And the audience that John was actually writing to was people who had much of their understanding of life. The question that all of us are asking ourselves, what is the meaning, what is the purpose of life? A lot of that was based on this word logos, or reason, or where we get our modern word logic from. And it says that the audience that John was writing to, much of their answers were very influenced by secular schools of thought rooted at the time in Greek philosophy. Here's just a quick image that I found. You can't read it, but it's tracking a lot of the Western idea. And it's intentional that you can't read it, but this is how much has gone into influencing people's understanding of life, right? Some of the most notable ones that we know, the Stoics, right? Or not the eclecticism, right? The skepticism and Epicureanism and thisism and thatism and whichism, all the isms you can probably think about is we often use as the answer to life itself. In fact, a commentator would write, a Stoic would have read that word logos and immediately see it as the rational principle by which everything exists and which is the essence of the rational human soul. That as a Stoic, you would say that the only way to make sense of the world is through reason itself, that there is no such thing as a God, but reason is God itself. This is where we see historic Roman Stoic philosopher Seneca would argue that we don't have a control of the world itself, right? That this is one of the ways that we see Stoicism being applied in our lives. But the one thing that we do have control over is how we react to certain things. In fact, some Stoics would even go through this idea of in order for us to bear through life itself, we need to go through voluntary discomfort. And I wonder if this this phenomenon that continues that around this idea of cold showers. Have you guys ever heard of a cold shower before? Okay. It's good that a lot of you don't because I'm still trying to understand it, but the logic behind it is a cold shower is in the morning. The first thing you do is you go into a cold shower for like 5 to 10 minutes, and the whole point of it is it's supposed to wake you up and get you ready for the day. Like if you go through that, then anything in life, you're ready to go. I'm like, that is crazy to me. The only cold shower I know of is when you turn on the water and you go in too fast, and when the water goes from the bottom to the thing on the top, that first split second, you guys all know what I'm talking about when it's cold water. That's the only cold shower I know, right? All this to say is that there's so many ways of understanding life itself. But not just if you're a Stoic, but let's say you're a Gnostic. Gnosticism is simply a combination of the Greek thoughts infused with a lot of the Eastern orthodoxical practices with elements of both Judaism and Christianity. In fact, this is what I would call the buffet approach to understanding life. Ooh, I like some of that. Ooh, I like that slogan. Oh, that Instagram post is great. Ooh, I like the roots of Stoicism. Oh, I love the practices of Buddhism. So let me just combine all of those thoughts into what I create for myself. That rather than choosing one or the other, we create and we mix and match and experiment to see what is most practical for ourselves. This is where I believe we get the phrase, I am spiritual but not religious. Christianity is just one of the ways, one of the means in which we can know ourselves. But as David Wells says, he says that this is the greatest deception of such thought. He says this, they are in search of a new consciousness. If they speak of transformation, as so many do, it is in terms of their own human potential, the innate sources of personal renewal that lies deep within. If they speak of their own intuitions, as they often do, it is with a sense of having on board a navigational system that enables to find their place in reality. That behind all of these schools of thought that we see directing our values and our belief systems is the self. And that is the greatest deception that we see. That is the same deception we saw at the Garden of Eden since the beginning of time itself, is that we can find the meaning of life within ourselves. And it's surprising to see how much of this influence has shaped our Western thinking. Next slide. Cool image. Superscholars.org. That sounds not credible at all. But go ahead, take a look at it because it's actually very interesting. And you start with ancient philosophy to the Athenian philosophy, which is the Greek and the Roman times, to the early Christian thought, to the Middle Ages, the Renaissance. And then you have modern philosophy, right, which is when the existentialists came in with all these crises and all these questions to understand life, all the way down to contemporary philosophy, or we'll call postmodernism, right? Look how much goes into answering that question, what is the meaning to life? Or even take Solomon, from Ecclesiastes chapters 1:17, he says, "And I applied my heart to know wisdom and to know madness and folly. I perceive that this is also but a striving after the wind." That even Solomon himself, who was given by God the gift of wisdom so that he can understand life, even he himself says, "I searched and I searched and I searched, but I could find nothing that would give me peace. Everything is vanity." It is no wonder why so many people go through midlife crises, right? A midlife crisis, what happens is if you lived your whole life, you've gone from, you've gone through all the loops in life. You got a good school, good education, then you have a family, you buy a house, and you go through every little loop in life only to find yourself in your 40s and 50s. What is the purpose of it all? And this is where men especially decide to go buy motorcycles, like to go have fun, right? But it is no wonder, because at the core root of it, what is driving that answer to the meaning of life? To make this even more personal, it's not even just the external ways that we see, whether it's in philosophies or even other religions. It's also seeing how much of our personal experience begs us to answer that question. Take, for example, our family slogans. Maybe you didn't have a family slogan, but I think we all did at one point, both spoken and unspoken. Growing up, my family slogan was this: study hard. In fact, my family slogan was actually, from my mom, was, "There's only A's allowed in this house," right? No A minuses, only A's, right? Maybe it's not even just the spoken family slogans, but maybe some of the unspoken ones. For example, again, for me, would be sacrifice now so you can enjoy later. Can you imagine when I told my parents I wanted to become a pastor? Their slogan to me at the time was, "Why do you have to do that now? Do that after you turn like 40, 50, we've lived your retirement as well, and then you can serve God. And then you can do all those things that you want to pursue." But my guess is that all of us in this room, we are here, we are living life because there is a spoken or even unspoken family slogan that we live by. Maybe it's not a slogan, maybe it's not a philosophy, maybe it's nothing I said, but it's actually maybe your career. Or as David shared, at one point in his life, it was about security and success. Or maybe for some of us, it's our marriages, our families, or even our children, all of which are great and good things. But in all of my search, and all of my understanding of some of these complicated ways to understand life, is this common denominator of the existence that something is wrong. Something is broken. Philosophers would actually say is the existence of evil itself. And I think if we just look at our news around us, we would all agree to that. And here's what I learned. A lot of these philosophies, a lot of these family slogans, a lot of these personal experiences are merely reactions to either the pre-existent conditions or even the evils of life. Let me explain. Because this world is this way, I must be this way. Because this world has taught me survival of the fittest, I have to be this way. I don't want to be that mean person, but it's this culture that I have to be like this. But let me tell you why Christianity is so fundamentally and radically different. If you go back to verse 1, it says that John begins with a phrase, "in the beginning," a phrase that any reader during that time would render them back to the original Genesis account, where it says, "In the beginning, God created," and the creation story happens. Why? It means that John is saying that in the beginning, meaning before anything was created, before life began itself, before the world existed, in fact, before even the heavens were created, Jesus was there. Do you get that? Jesus was not part of God's creation, but Jesus was there before life began itself. That just as God existed, he was there. What does that mean? It means this: Jesus cannot be merely a reason for life. He is not just the answer or one of the many answers to the question of life. But for John to say, in the beginning, Jesus was, is to say that Jesus is the very source of life. Amen? He is not just a solution to the brokenness or the chaos that we see in our world, but like I said, he is the source of life. Do you see how radical this thought would have been to the hearers during that time? That the meaning of life, the purpose of life, the thing that is driving all of us is not found in some reason or idea or even our personal experience, but it can only be found in a person. As it says in verse 14, and the Word became flesh and dwelt among us. What does that mean? David Wells continues, he says, the alternative connection to what is ultimate is, of course, revelation. In this view, it is not the human being reaching up to seize the meaning of life or gazing into life itself for that meaning, like every other philosophy, like every other way to approach life itself, but it's that God is reaching down to explain life's meaning. And how does he choose to do that? God doesn't give us the perfect argument. He doesn't give us the perfect idea. He doesn't give us the perfect way. But what God gives us is a perfect person, the very person of Jesus Christ himself. Why? Because in that perfect person, we see that he experiences all of the suffering, pain we go through. He celebrates the joys of life itself. He knows how to empathize with us emotionally. He knows what is going through our thoughts at all times. You find me another religion where you are willing to see a God who is willing to suffer. No. As David shared, we saw that on the walk to Calvary, a God suffering. That sounds blasphemous. But that is the truth. Because in the very person of Christ, we see that more than just a reason for life, we are looking to be understood, heard, known, and loved. So how does that change us? I'm going to go through these real quick. In verse 4 through 5, it says that Jesus is the light to the darkness that we see in our world. A commentator refers to this darkness not merely as the brokenness of this world, but rather to the ignorance of man itself, that we all are all ignorant to God himself. And to say that Jesus is a light to the world is not merely a solution to the brokenness. Rather, it's a deeper revelation that happens in the very depths of man itself. That we come to this conclusion that life is only found in Christ himself. Not only is Jesus the light, but it says in verses 12 to 13 that Jesus says that those who believe in him are no longer born of blood, the will of flesh, or the will of man, but of God himself. Meaning that the only way that Jesus can describe this transformation that happens when we're willing to believe in him, right? The only way to describe the magnitude of that transformation is birth itself. That we are born again. And we'll talk more about that on Easter Sunday. And that's what we want to do, is for this Easter Sunday, we want to understand what does it mean for us to be born again. Because John talks about that those who are willing to believe in him, put their faith in him, they are no longer born of the constraints of this world that we live in, or even the personal experiences that have shaped us. We are now born of God himself. What John is talking about, he's talking about a life as it was supposed to be in its original design and intent. A life to the fullest. And that's what we see, is that through the testimony of Clara, through the testimony of their family, what's beautiful is not only do we see the miraculous healing of the baby girl, but we see how the family is able to understand that life can only be found in Christ, only by God himself. And so for this Easter, this is what we're going to focus on, is what does it look like for us to be made new? What does it mean for us to be made new? As we end this morning, let me ask us again, what is the meaning of your life? What is the purpose of your life? What's surprising to me is how much that question drives so many of us. But the irony is when I talk with so many of you, I find it interesting how often we don't actually have an answer to that question. And here's my challenge for us as we begin this series. If you really want to find that answer, if you really want to challenge everything that I set up here, then wouldn't you explore a God who says that life itself can only be found in the very person of Jesus Christ? How can you decide if you believe or not if you haven't looked at the life of Jesus? I'm going to end with this last quick story. Imagine if you were to think about your future spouse, or for us married folks, you found your spouse that way, where it's all about prove to me that you're the one for me. Prove to me that you're the one for me. That would be terrible, right? Please, if you're not dating yet, please don't approach life like that, because I went down that path. It does not work out well for you. Trust me. I remember first unofficial date I had with my wife. I walked in with a list of questions and case scenarios for her. Because you have to realize I was going into ministry. I had to make sure she knew what she was signing up for. I sat down with her and I shared this story with some of you. We were in her living room dorm area. I sat down and said, hey, I need to be very clear with you. If you want to go down this path, you understand what you're signing up for. And I even proceeded to say, let me give you some scenarios. If a church event ended really late, what would you do? What would you say? How would you feel? First unofficial date. She looked at me and was like, this is the dumbest guy I've ever met. And said, this is crazy. I'm not signing up for this. And it hit me and I was like, you're right. It's silly, but sometimes I feel that that's how we approach to knowing God. God, what would you do in this scenario for my life? God, what would you do if this happened to me? God, where are you going to be? What are you going to do for me if I get to that place? That is not knowing a person. That is trying to find another reason to believe or doubt. My prayer and my hope and my challenge for us this morning is that you would see the scriptures every time you open the word, instead of trying to find another reason, is to encounter a person. As it says in Colossians 1:19, for in Jesus, all the fullness of God was pleased to dwell, and through him to reconcile to himself all things, whether on earth or in heaven, making peace by the blood of his cross. For only in Jesus can we experience life to the full. Let's pray together.